Welcome to the Hidden Gifts of Loss podcast, where we explore how loss can transform us and often leave us stronger and with more insights and acceptance. And no one, I think, would be more familiar with loss than a hospice nurse. And I am so deeply honored today to have Cheryl Marita here as my guest. She has spent 57 years in nursing, most of it in hospice. And she has published this wonderful book, holding it up here. But, okay. I guess I can't hold it up with my fake background, but it's called Touching.
I hold it
There we Thank you, Cheryl. Touching
You're
the Veil, End of Life Stories through the Eyes of a Hospice Nurse. And it's beautiful and heartbreaking and inspiring and just, wow, what a gift. Talk about a gift coming from loss. This book is a gift. And thank you so much. And oh my gosh, there's just so much in here to unpack. I've been just absorbed in these stories and I relate to so much of it as well, just from what little bit of my experience with death was really just limited to taking care of my mom. But there's so many things in here that I know I wish I would have known, and that I feel like your book is going to help so many people. And I'm sure that it already has. You published it in 2022. I love that it took you 10 years to write and you even went back to school. That's encouraging. I've been plodding along with my memoir for 3 years. Cheryl, welcome. I'm just so happy that you're here. Thank you.
thank you for having me. And the book took 10 years to write, partly because I started writing it from the patient's perspective. And all of my mentors and readers kept telling me that I had to be more involved and I had to be in the book. And that took many years for me to acclimate to not writing about, not focusing on the depths of the experience for my patients, but the depth of experience for me. But I appreciate the fact that I guess it needed to take that long because the feedback has been great. And I'm excited right now. I can show you it has that little sticker on it because it got accepted as a finalist for the New Mexico, Arizona Book Awards.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's
Very
wonderful. Very cool. Not surprising, though. It's so rich. Oh my gosh.
But still have to take some deep breaths.
Right? But I was taking notes as I was reading. There were so many things that just really struck me. And in the first chapter, when you're talking about George, and you said that hospice work is about leaving, about being present while leaving. Ugh.
You know, it's fascinating because I realize that my life has been molded by hospice and death. And I have been able to have an experience that the majority of the United States people in our death denying culture, people don't get to experience the normalcy of death. Like you said, you're being with your mother, you had to be daughter, death doula, and hospice caregiver all at the same time with probably very little training or guidance except for what hospice provide you.
Basically, I was like, who put me in charge here? But I didn't have a choice. That it happened right smack dab in the beginning of COVID just made it's crazy. And I remember I would ask the hospice nurses, how am I going to know when it's time? And I think that was my biggest fear, was that I was going to be alone when she passed and I wouldn't know what to do. And afterwards, and I learned that people take time and they wash the body and do all these things. I didn't know that I was supposed to do that, or that I even could have done that. I wish I would have known.
And because your mom died during COVID, hospice had to deal with all of the government regulations and everything. because I do think that usually hospice staff do try to open up every opportunity for you to offer what they know about other people who have been the daughter of with their mother dying. So I'm sorry that you didn't get the full experience, but I'm glad that you did have hospice.
Me too. And they were wonderful. And I felt so bad in all the PPE that they had to wear every time they came. It was just, no, nobody knew, and you just couldn't be too careful. But they were absolutely wonderful. And I just have so much respect for your profession. And but you talked in the book too about how you had to be around death all day and then come home and switch gears and take care of you.
And yeah, I wrote about it in my blog. I do want to tell people that I write every week on Morsels of Marita about what's come up for me in my week of work or my week of life. And I really had to learn how to be present. It's not hard to learn to be present at with my hospice patients or now with my palliative care patients, because the intensity and the intimacy of those moments essentially demands my presence. But then to be able to leave it at the bedside and go home to my kids. I mean, I think probably it was a balance because my kids demanded me to be present too. I don't know what the training is like now for hospice, but it to me it was a gift that I learned to be able to try at least to be in the moment. And I mean that's the Buddhist philosophy. That's so much of what we learn with prayer and to be the best we can be in any moment. But I find that I have to practice it more now because with media and everything, you can get kind of caught up with multitasking and being not present in one moment, but trying to be present in 3 or 4 or 5 moments at the same time. So that I would say is probably the gifts that I took away from hospice. That and as my kids would say, yeah, being brutally honest. But in hospice, you don't have time to develop a slowly evolving relationship. You just get dropped right in. And so it's important to be as kind and loving and honest during my hospice visits and my palliative care visits. So that when you asked what was the one gift that I could take away, that is by far to me the most important. I was talking to the executive director of a hospice I worked for in Tucson, and we were reminiscing because the gift also comes with some baggage in that we sometimes, no, not sometimes, we really have trouble with social gatherings because we know how to go down into intimacy and difficult discussions so quickly. We don't know how to talk about the weather very well.
I can so relate to that.
Oh, really?
I'm not very good at small talk either. That's why this is like this podcast with this particular topic is so perfect because let's just go right down the rabbit hole and get into it.
Yeah.
Talk about life and death. But that's what's real. And
It is. And to be able to accept it, I'm working with a friend and we are doing a project called uh, Living While Aging or Reflections on Living While Aging. And we're asking people to send postcards and we're collecting them. But one of the postcards that I got last week just was a beautiful artwork on one side. And then on the other side, it was about aging was walk hand in hand with death. And I think that that's probably another gift that I've been given is to the preciousness of life that is in being present, yes, but to wake up and to treasure the day because you can get kind of caught up in all the drama that's going on around us rather than in the leaves and the flowers or the weeds even.
Oh, Yeah, so good. That's absolutely true. And I felt like that was one of my transformations too, after going through that loss, was to just not take anything for granted.
Yeah.
You just don't know what's going to happen. And it is, life is precious and it is a gift that
Yeah.
we're here. And he said, let's see. Yeah, one of the things that you also said was that your patients taught you to take risks, and dying brings out the speaking truths and acting fearlessly. And yeah, that's exactly it. It just demands that intimacy is created. And imagine you don't know what you're walking into every time. And
You
you've got
really
to
don't, because it can change so quickly.
I know
Probably the story about, I didn't think about that one, but the story that about risk taking, I don't know what the title
I think
is.
that was the one, I think it was about Bob and Breathless, I believe. It was
Oh,
called
Breathless was, to me, the most profound one that I felt like people would, even in my preface, I said that it was probably going to be the one that people wouldn't believe. But Bob was, I'd been called to his bedside, and he wasn't my patient. I was the director of hospice at the time. And we got a phone call saying that he was going to die that day and that I needed to be at his bedside. But he had been perfectly stable for a few weeks, so I couldn't make sense out of that. Well, it turned out that Bob and his wife were part of a evangelical church that had been praying people into death for many years. And Bob had decided that he and his minister had been praying all night long together, and they had communication from God that it was okay for Bob to die, that he didn't have to suffer anymore. And so we were called to his bedside. We gathered around. The minister led us in a prayer. Then he told us what to expect. And I talked to him beforehand, and he was alert. And he said, "This is what I want, Cheryl, and I want you to witness this," because they didn't think that I had enough confidence in myself to be the friend. So this was really a profound gift. And the minister counted to 10 very slowly, and we were supposed to keep our eyes closed, but I couldn't stand it because I was just, I was shocked and scared and excited and totally indulged with love around the bed. And when the minister counted to one, Bob stopped breathing, and I saw this. To me, it was his soul go out of his mouth and up into the sky, into the air, to the ceiling. And I've never been the same since then, because I truly do believe in that the spirit lives afterwards.
I do too. Is that the picture on your cover? Is that
Well,
reminiscent of the wisp that you
that, and the cover is, I had my good friend Debbie Dennison designed it, and I refused to tell her to give her any guidance on it. I said, "You've got the title, you've read the story, so I want to see what you come up with." And so these are all, the purple dots are all the lives of the people I've touched. And then the veil is the golder. Yeah, I know. It made me cry too. So when I saw it, it's such, I think that, I guess, because I talk a lot about death and how we're getting through, how we're living, that my friends are used to being pretty comfortable with intimate conversations. And so that was what she took away.
Oh, I love it.
Thanks for noticing that. That's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. You said that you don't go to the church, as
Yeah.
I relate to that as well, but that you still believe in miracles and an afterlife, and so do I. It just makes so much sense, and that one of the gifts that I've received was just that sense of knowing that person is around you, like when you called on your dad and when that one night when you were driving home, it's
I'm so tired and lost. It was so dark, and it was pretty funny because I called on him because he had driven drunk all of his life and we were never in an accident. So I figured he would be pretty reliable as the spirit to come help me out there in the boonies.
he must have had some protection around him. And he had pancreatic cancer too. I read that. That's what my mom had.
And I do think that one of the things that to me is important is that death isn't only somber, isn't only sad and tearful. My patients in hospice, they played tricks on me. The one young woman that had multiple sclerosis, she was one who pushed me a lot to take risks. But this was back in the 70s. So the rules were a little bit less. Yeah. So it was, riding the clouds. She had been a horsewoman and a pianist. And in 3 weeks, she got pulmonary. She was on hospice, blind and quadriplegic. And so she decided that I was going to be her, become the angel. The It was just becoming a big thing then that where kids would be able to make a wish. It was a make a wish. She decided I was her make a wish foundation. That's part of her hospice experience. And so she wanted to go out to the lake that she loved to smell it. She couldn't see it. She couldn't feel it because she was in a wheelchair. But yeah, she says, I don't care what you have to do. And it's not going to be on hospice time. So we put her in a wheelchair in the back of my van and tied her in with rope. But it was a magical experience. And, we brought the lake to her in cups of water so she could taste it. And we dumped it on her. And then we sang together. But she tuned into nature in a different way than I had ever experienced before because her hearing was essentially their one sense and taste, of course, but her hearing was so acute. She could identify frogs and the different birds and she told me about how the wind felt on her. And I was more unconscious of nature before that experience. So I guess you're making me learn about the gift. More gifts.
I like what you said in the questionnaire that you feel like the spirits of your patients really pushed you to write that book. Yeah. I similarly feel that I don't know that my parents' spirits pushed me, but I feel like they've blessed this endeavor because it wasn't something I ever thought of doing until after. And then I was having conversations about death all the time. And I thought, I can't be alone in this. There has to be other people who want to talk about it. Plus, I don't think all of my friends want to talk about it with me all the time either. I gotta find some people to talk to who can go deep.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's sacred work, what you do.
Yeah, it
Totally.
does feel to be sacred. Yeah. And hospice was a great training ground for the work I'm doing now, which is palliative care, um, which I describe as being more difficult than hospice because the people that I met in hospice had all had a conversation with their doctors about choices that they were making and that hospice could be one of them. So I wasn't delivering the news, so to speak. I was really trying to create the very best environment for them with comfort and quality of life as the focus. And with palliative care, it's a program where we focus on what we call goals of care so patients can be clear with their healthcare providers about what their goals are. Because a doctor may have goals for a patient, but the patient may not necessarily want them. So those kind of conversations are, I always find more of a challenge because people on palliative care can live for years and years
Mm.
um, while they're getting aggressive treatment if that's what they want. But getting providers, getting doctors and nurses and specialists to talk about palliative care and what the outcomes are, and then also patients and families to think of palliative care as a really different program from hospice. That's the effort that we're all trying to participate in now. So,
Yeah, interesting. I always thought of them as going hand in hand, but not really.
all of hospice includes palliative care, but
Okay.
palliative care does not include hospice.
Okay, I see. So one of my friend's mother was just put on palliative care. She was already in a care home, but just took a turn for the worst. And she has dementia, but then they think that she might have cancer all throughout
Mhm.
as well. So she's hospice and palliative care. But so that's interesting that, yeah, you could be on palliative care for years. And it's just palliative care is to keep someone comfortable, basically, isn't it?
While they may be doing a lot of aggressive treatment with chemotherapy or radiation or surgery and all of it, but it's an extra layer of really focusing on comfort and symptom management. So,
Have you run into families who object? One of the things my hospice nurse told me was that she'd run into families where they don't want the patient to be on palliative care because then they feel like they won't be present. So it's like about them, but not the patient, which I imagine
yeah,
that would be a challenge.
it's difficult. It takes lots of energy and discussions and really reviewing when people say, I don't want it. I always want to know what it is and, what they do want. Because many patients that I talk to now think that, well, I talk to people about resuscitation. And if you're going, it's hard because our normal advanced directives get into the idea of you can choose to be resuscitated, you can choose to let your doctor. But a lot of people don't realize that for elders, many of us want a natural death and we don't want to be on machines. And the machines don't work for us because our bodies are already, we've been using our organs for a long time. And I'm 78, and I know that my heart, my kidneys, my liver, all of those, my lungs, they've all been doing a good job for me for 78 years. And I would like them to continue doing that for another 10, 20 years, maybe. But if something happens and my heart were to stop, I wouldn't survive resuscitation. Or if I did survive, I wouldn't be who I am now. And so those are the conversations that I think are really difficult. And families they want their loved ones to be what they were like 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's a tough choice, right? Because so you survived, but then you're the same person you were. And then what is your quality of life? And one of the things you mentioned in your book was that when you were in intensive care, death is basically the enemy, and everything goes into stopping it from happening. Whereas in hospital, it's a natural part of life,
Mhm.
and you live in this death denying culture. And
Yeah, I think some of the things that are happening now, though, there's so many websites now that are focused on talking about death. Hill Rubin and in Albuquerque and has a before I die conference every year, and it's held in other states too. And then when you said you had to be a death doula, but there's a lot more training out there for people to be death doulas. I always figure, well, the baby boomers, we see ourselves as extremely powerful, and because there's just so many of us too, well, that evokes its own power. So I do think that death is going to become a lot more commonly discussed and with lots of different options
Mhm.
in the next year. So,
I think possibly because of COVID too. All of a
yes.
sudden, there was just so much depth,
Yeah.
and you can't really avoid talking about it. We all were touched by it in some way.
Yeah.
I hey, I never thought of that as a hidden gift of COVID, but a huge event like that that affected everyone.
1.5 million people died from COVID.
Yeah. My my father had heart failure, but it was exacerbated by COVID.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He might have been around longer, but he was also like one of the men in your store, Bernice and Ed, where she didn't know how to do any of those basic things. My daughter, we stayed with my mom and then he died the next year. But as we were getting ready to leave, she was checking in with her grandpa and finding out what he knew how to do. And she was going around the house putting sticky notes everywhere to explain how to use the washing machine and things like that. It's funny how that men of that generation often,
They were really dependent on their wives. Yes. Yeah.
yeah. So it's not surprising that they don't often hang around that long after the one spouse goes.
Or they tried to uh, get remarried or at least in a relationship pretty quickly. I I realized that early on when you said that your parents' energy is helping you move forward with your book and now with the podcast. I think that that would be a question for all of the listeners is what is your hidden gift? And I don't think it's too hidden many times if we let ourselves look at it. But to me, yeah, Lawrence, the gentleman that I took care of in intensive care, he wanted finally to pass without having a second or a third, rather, kidney transplant. Um,
Wow.
but so he pretty much designed the rest of my life to when I chose to support him in his decision to die comfortably with his mother at his side in intensive care. And then for me, go into hospice work and now into palliative care and writing the book, it- there can be a door that opens because of a death that we experience, a loss, and it can open into an amazing way to live. So,
Yeah.
I really appreciate your courage in presenting hidden gifts that way.
Thank you. Yeah. It's a became an interesting way to look at it. It's not the way you look at it in the moment when you're
No.
going through it. Yeah. It's only later when you look back. You're like, okay, that makes sense now.
And when you're in the moment, you don't even know if you can tolerate that moment because you don't know how long it's going to be. You don't know if you have the skills or the emotional strength to get through that. And that's where hospice and family come into being because somebody has to be able to say, you can do it. And this is about how long to expect.
Mhm.
Because when you didn't know, you don't have the parameters to think, oh, mom's not eating, she's not drinking, she's not urinating anymore. And so somebody could then say, yes, we are getting into the final days.
Yeah. And I would see her and think, this has got to be it. She couldn't possibly go on any longer from this. And then they would say, no, she has a couple more weeks. And so each
Yeah.
stage as it unfolds, and you've never seen it before. It's kind of shocking, like the blue extremities, the blue feet, and the tacky skin, all these things. I learned so much, and they were really wonderful at explaining it all. But until you get up close with it like that, you just don't. You don't know, and you don't know how you're gonna be. I think that was one of my biggest fears was, "How am I gonna be when this
Right.
happens?" Right?
Yeah. And that's the question that I ask a lot of people when they're saying, oh, I don't know what to do. And I can't be at my dad's bedside. I can't do this. I don't want to. And I was like, how do you want to remember yourself in 5 years? Do you want to remember that you left? Or do you want to remember that you stayed by your dad's bedside and prayed with him or told him you loved him? So I always try to get people into the future of memory of think about yourself looking back now, 5 years from now. How do you want to be?
Oh, wow, that's such a good question. And have you found that most people are able to change their mind and
Yeah.
be able to show up?
Well, we get caught up in our lives that we have to go to work. And I had an important meeting this afternoon. Even with my kids, when their dad was dying, there were a few times that I had to ask that question because everybody wants to go back to their comfort zone, which is their normal day to day. I made a commitment. I'm going out for dinner tonight.
Mhm.
I have an important meeting next tomorrow, and none of that really matters when you're talking about the last minutes with somebody you love.
Mhm. Yeah. Did you take care of your husband or did you have
No,
hospice too?
he was on hospice. We were divorced and he lived in a different town, but the kids were able to stay with him. And it was interesting because he was a physician and he always said he wanted to die on the tractor like his dad did. His dad was a farmer. He did. He had metastatic cancer and he had ended up with some seizures on Monday. He went to that. He was admitted by ambulance. And his doctor buddies came to visit him on like Friday that week and said, what are we going to do? Because he has to see patients on Monday. And my kids are like, he's not going to be alive on Monday. And they had to say that to physicians.
With physicians.
So
Wow.
when you think about death denying in our society, yeah,
Wow, that really speaks to the paradigm that the physicians. Yeah.
it's really hard. And it's so personal for everybody because it's like, how am I going to live without him doing what he's done all these years? So
Right. Yeah.
there is a different way to approach it. And the story of the promise is, to me, what some people experience, which is a friend of mine had called me up and asked if I would be on call for her mother. Her mother was in her late 80s and doing okay, living alone and having a lot of support, great neighbors and Meals on Wheels and different people visiting. But my friend wanted to go away to visit her mother's homeland in, I think it was Norway or Sweden. And so her and her partner wanted to take 3 weeks and they had tried to take this vacation, I think maybe 4 or 5 times. And something always happened to prevent it. And
Mhm.
this time, their, her mother said, I really want you to go. You have to go. And now when we're looking back on it, we're like, oh, it was all a plot. So her and her partner called from the airport and mom had a headache. But she said, don't worry about it. I'll call Cheryl and I'll take some Tylenol and it'll be fine. Well, the headache actually was the beginning of a series of strokes. So my friend flew away on Friday and by Sunday we had her on hospice. And all the paperwork that my friend had put in order was wonderful. And mom had participated in it all and to hire caregivers and the doctor and all. And when I called the mother's doctor to say what had happened and that we needed hospice, she just cracked up. She's like, oh my God, Anna, this is all a plot by her. So she could die comfortably and not be a burden to her daughter.
Mm.
And because she her daughter had taken care of her for years and years and years. So sometimes people have a different way of, that they don't want everybody around.
Mhm. That was a gift for her daughter, even though
Yes.
not have been the gift her daughter wanted, but that's what her spirit.
She was not surprised. She was definitely not surprised.
Wow. So by the time she came back, her mother was gone.
And yet we had her ashes and ready.
Oh,
Yeah, so I don't think anybody, there's 15 stories in the book. Every one of them is different, and every death is different, just like every one of our lives is different. So we just have to accept that we're all going to do it the way we need to and want to, but we all need support doing it.
yeah, absolutely. And planning, like you said, she had all the paperwork in order and everything. That would be, something that I would encourage people to do because my
Yeah.
parents did that too. And that made it so much easier. And I'm sure being around families where that's been taken care of versus not, I'm sure you see a very different outcome.
And to be sure to communicate what your wishes are. That sometimes, like one person I took care of recently in the emergency room, he had completed a living will, but it was in his safe at home, and he didn't want to burden the kids with any of the contents. And he ended up having a massive heart attack at the grocery store. So there were like 8 or 9 kids, but nobody knew what his wishes were. So they had to go through a very difficult day that could have been a lot easier with one conversation. So for all the readers, all the listeners, please communicate your wishes and be realistic about what your family can do and what you want. And it takes a lot. The more conversations you can have, better.
Yeah, that's such good advice. And that's what your book is helpful with, is going to help so many people with. Because it is hard. People don't want to think about it. So obviously they don't want to talk about it either. They don't want to think they're going to lose that
Yeah.
person someday. But we all are going to lose people. And
Yeah. My kids have said, at first they were tired of me talking about stuff, but now, because I'm 78, so they're in their 50s, now we're making choices based on maybe I'm not going to be around a long time. So let's go to Europe. Let's have this trip. Let's do a family reunion. Every time I say something to my kids, like, would you like to? They're like, yes, we're going to do it.
well, yeah, don't wait. Don't put it off, right?
Yeah.
You do it today because you just don't know.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for
Thank
everything
you
that you've
for the time.
Yeah, my pleasure, my honor, truly.
And you can buy the book on Amazon. Any bookstore can get it. But in the back is my information about contacting me, my email, my website, and the blog.
Great. And I'll share the in the show notes too. Okay. All right, wonderful. Well,
Thank you for
thank
having
you.
me. And thank you for doing that.
Absolutely. Thank you.